Today is Monday, December 21st. Welcome to another episode of Legal Briefs. I'm Wes Austin. I'm a lawyer, keeping you updated on the latest legal news. The coronavirus, we have a vaccine for it now. Pfizer has a vaccine. I think Moderna's, I don't know how to say it. I think theirs is right around the corner. The question is do we have to take it? Let's just say we're nervous and we don't want to take it. Do we have to take it? First off, this is not legal advice, just kind of generally talking about the principles. If you feel like you need a lawyer when you're watching this, you should hire a lawyer. But with the COVID-19 vaccine, if you take it, what's the worst that could happen? Okay, let's talk about whether somebody can make us take it. If we're nervous, do we have to take it? Let's talk about it. So if a state enacted a mandatory COVID-19 vaccination law, would it be constitutional? Probably yes, based on the U.S. Supreme Court decision of Jacobson v. Massachusetts. This goes all the way back to 1905. There was a smallpox outbreak, I think it was in 1902, and Cambridge enacted a regulation that required vaccination against smallpox. Well, Jacobson did not want to have the vaccination. And this went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, yes, the mandatory vaccination regulation is constitutional. You can do that. All right. And that's really seems to be the controlling case in this area. There was one other Supreme Court case that I thought we should note, which was Zucht v. King out of Texas in 1922. There was a school requiring students to be vaccinated before they could enroll. That went all the way up to the Supreme Court. They were arguing it wasn't constitutional. The U.S. Supreme Court said, yeah, it is constitutional. So the U.S. Supreme Court has pretty much said mandatory vaccination laws are constitutional. So I think they would find it constitutional. States have mandatory vaccination laws. I don't know of any that have enacted the COVID-19 vaccination as mandatory yet, but we just barely got this thing. So give it time and we'll see what states require it. But most states do allow exemptions to their mandatory vaccination laws. So they'll usually let you have exceptions for like a medical exception, a religious exception, and I think even some do a philosophical exception. So usually they will let you try to get an exemption from the requirement in one of these areas. That varies state by state, so it depends on what state you're in, but usually they have these exemptions in those different areas. Now, those movies in Hollywood like I Am Legend or World War Z or those, they weren't caused by vaccinations, right? So if a state did enact a mandatory vaccination law with the COVID-19 vaccine, I do think that it would be found constitutional based on the two cases that we talked about. That just seems to be a settled area, and the state has this ability to do that. Now, I didn't read any cases where the state would hold you down and make you have the vaccine. Like that, I didn't see anything like that. If a state were to try to enact some mandatory vaccination law with COVID-19, it probably would be, you'd have to prove that you had the vaccine before you could get a driver's license, or I don't know, or maybe the federal government, if they did something like that, it might be they wouldn't give you a passport unless you had some kind of proof of that. Those are the kinds of ways I think a government would try to make it mandatory. What about an employer? Could your employer do that? Well, it's my understanding that happens right now with respect to the flu with some healthcare workers, and I also think some teachers. I think we have groups in both of those that right now are required to have the flu vaccine before they can work. Now, if an employer did require employees to have the COVID-19 vaccine, they would have to be careful to make sure they had exceptions in certain areas. They would have to have medical exceptions for the Americans with Disabilities Act. You also have Title VII from the Civil Rights Act. You can't discriminate based on someone's religion. They'd need to be careful because of that. Employers also might have to deal with unions. So if you belong to a union, the employer might have to deal with the collective bargaining agreement in dealing with whether they can require this COVID-19 vaccination. So employers would have to be careful, but generally, could they require people to do that? I think the answer is probably yes, based on the case law that I've looked at. All right, so what's the summary? I mean, based on everything I've read, could somebody require you to have a COVID-19 vaccination? I think such a mandatory requirement would be found constitutional, but they would probably require it in some way where, like if you want to have this job, you have to have it, or if you want to come to school, you have to have it, or if you want to get some kind of permit, you would have to show that. I think they would do it in that kind of way. We'll have to wait and see what governments do, what employers do in this area. I'm sure that if a zombie apocalypse could happen, it wouldn't start with a vaccine that everybody in the world had to have that was kind of rushed out. I'm sure that is not how it would happen, so I'm sure you're fine, don't worry. Zombies aren't real. They look real on TV and they feel real. I have to do a little disclaimer at the end. Again, this was not legal advice. If you feel like you need a lawyer, go hire a lawyer that lives in your state, or if you're outside of the United States, hire a lawyer that lives in your country and consult with a lawyer. Thank you for watching. See you next time.